In the heat of a Missouri summer in 1867, in a quiet farming community beyond Sedalia, an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell became the center of the strangest, most unsettling case the region had ever known. The only doctor for miles, a man named Samuel Harding, watched the child closely and filled 3 leather journals with what he saw, notes on a boy who seemed to obey every rule of manners and none of the rules of human feeling. At first, Timothy was easy to like. He was small and pale with cropped blonde hair and a habit of answering every adult with, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am." To the eye, he was courteous and industrious, the kind of child who never talked back, never played when there was work to do, and never complained about blisters or heat. But as the months turned, accidents began to collect around him like dry leaves around a doorstep. People died, animals died, and the question of who Timothy really was, what he really was, would haunt Pettis County for generations. To understand how it began, you have to understand the world he walked into. Missouri in 1867 was still raw from the Civil War. Fields were short on hands, families were short on fathers and sons, and grief was a daily kind of weather. The Caldwell farm lay in a green valley about 15 miles south of town. James and Martha Caldwell had once pictured that valley full of cattle and corn. But James died at Wilson's Creek in 1861, and Martha's lungs gave out in the winter of 1865. Their older son, Thomas, inherited debts he couldn't pay and a farm he couldn't keep alone. When a letter arrived saying Thomas's brother William had died at Andersonville, leaving a widow and an 8-year-old boy, Thomas made a hard, practical decision. The child needed a home. The farm needed hands. So in the spring of 1866, Timothy came to the valley with a small cloth bag and a pair of pale blue eyes that looked too old for his face. Thomas was a scarred man made harder by loss. His wife Sarah had grown sharp from the same diet. They were not people who coddled. They expected the boy to work. He did. Timothy spoke little of the life before the valley. He said his father was a soldier, and his mother had coughed blood. He said neighbors kept him for a while after she died. He didn't volunteer more and people didn't press. They noticed instead that he never slouched, never mocked, never whined. They noticed that when adults were speaking, he stood still and listened, the first person to feel the wrongness, not see it, not name it, only feel it, was Dr. Samuel Harding. In June of 1866, Timothy came into town with Thomas to buy supplies. Harding had treated men on both sides of the war and learned to read faces that lied about pain and hands that trembled when they swore they didn't. He spoke to the boy. Timothy answered cleanly, met his eyes, and didn't squirm the way country children did when strangers asked questions. "Perfectly respectful," Harding wrote later. Yet in his gaze I sensed an appraisal, as though I were the patient and he the physician. The neighbors watched as well. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, her land touched the Caldwell's fence line, often saw Timothy in the fields. "He worked like a little machine," she told her husband. "Sun up to sundown, no play in him at all." Her chickens seemed to agree that something was off. Whenever Timothy came near the fence, they huddled and squawked and wouldn't range. The first death seemed like a cruel accident. A hot afternoon in August. Willow Creek, shallow water. A girl of 5 named Mary Fletcher who loved to wander. Timothy brought the news to the blacksmith's house. Wet clothes, steady voice. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." They ran and discovered her face down in water not much deeper than a hand and a half. Harding said she had drowned, tragic but not unheard of out here. What troubled him wasn't the cause but the boy's account. Timothy described the exact position of Mary's body, the way her dress snagged on a hidden branch, the color of the water around her face. He said he was searching for a lost calf. Thomas confirmed a calf had gone missing. 2 days later it turned up grazing a mile away from the creek. At the funeral, Timothy bowed his head the whole time. He accepted thanks with quiet gravity. "I wish I'd found her sooner," he told Mary's father, and it sounded sincere. But Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the church, saw something she couldn't forget. When Mary's mother collapsed in grief when the town wept, the boy's expression never changed. His head stayed bowed, his mouth set in the shape of sorrow, and his eyes, those pale blue eyes, remained dry and alert, like a clerk counting coins in a ledger while a storm battered the windows. 3 weeks later came the second death. An old Norwegian, Henrik Larsson, who climbed Devil's Bluff to tend wild hives. Timothy said he was walking home when he spotted a man's hat caught on thorns below the bluff. They found Larsson at the base of the rocks with his neck broken, dead in an instant. There were bees all around him, more than seemed natural, clustered near the body. Harding climbed to the top to check the hives. They were undisturbed. The bees were busy and calm. If a swarm had knocked Larsson to his death, why were the hives so peaceful? And why were the dead bees gathered at the bottom instead of scattered along a line of panic and fall? By September, coincidence felt like a poor word. A 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods. The town searched for days. Timothy volunteered and moved through the timber like he had drawn the map himself, guiding grown men along deer paths and back trails they'd never noticed. "Herbs," he said when asked how he knew the land so well. "I look for plants my aunt can use." On the 4th morning he came to the Mills cabin at first light. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father. An old well 1/2 mile north, hidden by brush and fallen logs. They hauled Jacob up alive but fading, and despite Harding's care he died within hours. The scene at the well bothered Harding. The cover of logs and branches looked too neat, too purposeful, as if hands had arranged the camouflage to look like debris. If that was true, then someone had placed Jacob down there and hidden him from the search until rescue would be too late. Harding didn't say it aloud, but he wrote more intently after that. He visited the Caldwell place often, checking Thomas's back, Sarah's headaches, the ordinary ailments of farm life, and watching Timothy. He noticed the boy's questions. How can you tell if someone is truly dead? How long do different kinds of injuries take to kill? Could a person look like they're sleeping when they're not? Harding began to feed him gentle lies, misleading bits about fatal wounds or symptoms that pointed nowhere, to see what the boy would do with the information. Timothy never argued. He simply stored it all, precise and silent. When Harding spoke of battlefield surgeries, most children blanched or looked away. Timothy leaned in. "Did they scream when you cut off their arms?" he asked once, voice polite and curious. "Or were they too hurt to make noise?" Harding felt a cold travel his spine. By November, Harding's journals were thick with patterns. Livestock dying in odd ways on farms within walking distance of the Caldwell place. Chickens with necks broken cleanly. Calves strangled by ropes that shouldn't have been in the positions they were found. A good bull somehow breaking its leg in a ditch. Neighbors often remembered seeing Timothy near the fences the day before. On Eleanor Patterson's farm, Harding examined the dead hens and saw the same thing again and again. Exact force at exact places. Not a fox in a frenzy. A hand with a plan. When Thomas Caldwell hurt his back during the harvest, Harding had a reason to come by daily. That's when the truth began to show itself. Timothy mentioned a cave he liked to visit, a place to think and be alone. Harding found it. Inside were bones sorted by size, tools fashioned from farm iron and sharpened stone, and drawings, careful, detailed drawings, of animals cut and opened, with notes written in a neat hand. Subject remained conscious approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes, one line read. Vocalizations decreased. Movement ceased after pressure to throat. Harding's stomach turned. Worse still were the newer sketches, people, not animals. The small figure of Mary by water, the old man at the bluff, a child drawn at the bottom of a dark circle of stone with notes on thirst, sun, and the way strength drains day by day. A physician in 1866 had no language for psychopathy. The law had no place to put a child like this. Harding understood both truths in the same heavy breath. He also knew the town would never believe it. So he did something risky. He confronted Timothy himself. They walked, just the two of them, out to the far pasture. Harding said what he'd seen in the cave. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't deny. He simply watched the doctor and waited. "You're not going to tell," Timothy said at last, calm as if he were stating the weather. Harding asked why. "No one will believe you," the boy replied. And you want to know what I'll do next? It was the first honest smile Harding had ever seen on the child's face. How long, Harding asked, have you been doing this? Since I was 5, Timothy said. Maybe before. I started with insects, then moved up. Animals are simple. People are different. They understand more. That makes it interesting. What are you planning now? I need to learn what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely, the boy said. Someone who won't suspect until it's too late. Harding understood. Thomas and Sarah. That night he went to Sheriff William Crawford, a practical man who knew what a battlefield looked like and trusted Harding's eyes, if not his theories. Harding brought the drawings. He explained the accidents and the animal deaths. He repeated Timothy's words about his aunt and uncle. The law couldn't hang a child on suspicions and sketches, but it could watch. It could be there when the next move came. They made a plan. Harding would arrive at the usual hour with laudanum for Thomas's pain, enough to make him and Sarah hard to harm, not enough to stop their breathing. Crawford and a few trusted deputies would take positions on the property, close but unseen. At dawn, Harding drove his buggy to the farmhouse and knew before he stepped down that the day had turned. The yard was too quiet. The ordinary morning sounds, hens, pigs, the clatter of buckets, were gone. Timothy stood in the doorway with his sleeves rolled and his hands scrubbed raw, as if for a task that had to be done clean. "Good morning, Doctor," he said, voice pleasant, eyes bright with something like excitement. "I've been waiting for you." Inside, Thomas and Sarah lay still in their bed, breathing shallow and slow. Harding checked pulses and found them weak but steady. "What did you give them?" he asked, watching without turning. "Herbs from the woods," Timothy said. "There are so many useful plants." "They won't wake for hours," the boy added, almost cheerfully. "We can talk," and he did talk. He spoke like a lecturer about drowning and panic and the pattern of breath attempts before silence. He told Harding how he had pushed Mary's face under the creek and held her there, not with fury but with patience. He described loosening stones at the bluff, collecting bees in a bag, and startling an old man into a fatal misstep. He told how he lured Jacob with a lie about baby raccoons, helped him down into darkness, then covered the opening. He brought the child just enough water to extend suffering. He had measured the days. He had written it down. He had learned. "What do you plan to do with Thomas and Sarah?" Harding asked, the last of his composure draining. Timothy smiled again. "That's where you come in. You know what I am. You know what I can do. You're perfect for a new kind of study, a subject who understands and tries to stop me." He began gathering tools, a rope, a heavy candlestick, knives from the kitchen, laying them out with a surgeon's order. "I want to see what a man will sacrifice to save the people he cares for," he said. "Will you give yourself up? Will you fight? Will you run?" Harding drew the Navy Colt from his bag and told the boy to step away. Timothy didn't retreat. He looked at the pistol with interest and made a small calculation out loud. 6 chambers, 6 people to protect if the deputies outside were counted. "Even if you shoot me," he said, stepping closer, "you've spent your bullets." The struggle came fast. Timothy moved with a speed and certainty that didn't fit his size. He slashed at Harding's arm, twisted, slipped, and tried again. Harding wrenched the knife away. Timothy produced another. The commotion brought Crawford and his men through the back door. In a rush of boots and shouts, they had the boy on the floor and bound, while Harding checked the unconscious couple again. They were alive. "You can't prove anything," Timothy told them, sitting quiet and bloodied in the corner. "No one will believe a child did those things." "We don't have to prove everything," Crawford said. "We saw enough today." "You won't hang me," the boy replied, serene as a Sunday. "I'm too young. I'm too interesting." He was half right. The county prosecutors didn't know what to do with an 8-year-old whose sketches mapped cruelty in steady lines. The cave drawings were dismissed as a tormented orphan's acting out. The string of accidents became a string of coincidences. But 3 lawmen had witnessed an attempt on Thomas and Sarah's lives, and that couldn't be talked away. The law had no clean path for a child like this. After weeks of argument, the officials reached a compromise. Timothy would be remanded to the state hospital in Fulton for study and treatment under the alienists. the era's psychiatrists. Harding volunteered to accompany him and stayed on for months. He wrote what he saw. Timothy adapted to the hospital the way water adapts to a vessel. He learned quickly who wanted to be convinced of progress and gave them what they wanted: tears at the right stories, remorse placed like a hand on a Bible, gratitude spoken in tones that sounded true. Nurses and attendants said he was improving. Harding saw the performance for what it was and noted the gap between expression and feeling. In his reports, he wrote that Timothy understood happiness as a face people make when they want something to continue, and sadness as a face people make when they want help. He wrote that the boy could reproduce these signals on command without feeling a pulse of the emotion beneath. Then came a journal, a harmless-looking notebook a nurse had given Timothy to process his feelings. On its surface, it was a child's diary of guilt and hope. But a doctor named Martha Fitzgerald recognized something off in the rhythms of the sentences. She tested a cipher method she'd learned in Europe, and the text unlocked itself. The hidden writing didn't speak of healing. It recorded observations of the staff: who softened at tears, who stiffened at defiance, what rules were elastic, which doors were left ajar, how long a guard lingered on rounds. It was a manual on human buttons and hospital routine, written by a child who had decided to master both. They tightened security. They limited contact. Timothy adjusted as always. He stopped practicing one trick and started another. And in the summer of 1868, under circumstances the official report never made truly clear, he disappeared. The paperwork said he slipped away during a building transfer. Harding didn't believe it was that simple. He thought the boy had spent his 18 months in Fulton studying people the way some boys study birds, learning the patterns and the weak points, waiting for the weather to shift, and then flying at the one open window. After Timothy vanished, strange accidents appeared across the Midwest like distant brush fires. Harding clipped stories and saved letters and wrote notes in the margins. A carefully arranged fall here, an animal left tortured there. A boy or a young man who passed briefly through and seemed unusually helpful, unusually composed. Harding never proved that any of those tragedies belonged to Timothy. He could only trace the shape of the possibility and follow it as far as his life allowed. By the time he died in 1891, Harding had filled pages with a thought that troubled him deeply: that Timothy wasn't simply a tragic oddity, but a window into something human beings don't like to acknowledge. He wondered whether some people are born without the wiring that ties us to others, born without the invisible rope that tugs when someone cries, without the inner weight that makes a handshake before it hurts the defenseless. He imagined with dread what a person like that would become with more years, more strength, more charm, more practice. The Caldwell farm went quiet after Thomas and Sarah recovered. Neither of them could stand to stay. They left under other names as if the boy might someday find the old door and knock again. They never had children. The county sealed the cave. Folks avoided the valley long after the land was sold to developers in the 1890s. Stories hung there like fog. Animals wouldn't graze. You could feel watched if you stepped too close to the old fence line. Harding's journals eventually landed in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society, where scholars could request to read them. Most did not ask twice. The words are dry and clinical, but the chill travels through them all the same. As for Timothy Caldwell, no one ever proved where he went or what he became. Maybe he died nameless in some river town. Maybe he lived under another family name 2 states over, grew taller, grew smoother, and learned to smile with his eyes. Maybe he found work that rewarded his gift for reading people and guiding their choices without their noticing. Or maybe he didn't want work at all. Maybe he wanted only the next experiment, the next test of how far trust can be pushed before it breaks, and how close a man can stand to evil before he realizes what he's looking at. The case leaves a set of questions that have not softened with time. How do you protect a community from a danger it refuses to believe exists? How do you recognize a child who has learned to imitate empathy without ever feeling it? What does a society do when the old assumptions, that youth is innocence, that remorse can be taught, that all wounds can be healed, Prove powerless against a mind that sees human beings as tools and subjects and moving parts? Dr. Harding wrestled those questions until his last days, and he never found answers that brought him peace. What remains are the facts he wrote, and the lives that were changed. A farm abandoned, a cave sealed, a pair of tired people who slept under borrowed names, a physician whose notebooks outlived him, and a story that begins with a polite boy in a doorway and ends with the same boy vanishing into the long roads of the 19th century Midwest, leaving behind drawings, patterns, and the steady, unnerving thought that sometimes the face of innocence is only a mask that fits very well. That is the record as best as it can be told. The summer heat, the shallow creek, the bees at the bluff, the silent well under a lid of timber, the careful rope, the folded knives, the soft voice asking questions no child should care to ask, the law arriving just in time, the hospital that became a classroom, and the door that opened one day when no one was quite watching. From there the trail fades and the dark walks on. If you think there's more to it, if you suspect the official ends are not really ends at all, you're not alone. The story still breathes in the corners of archives and in the lingering unease of anyone who's read those old pages. Maybe Timothy's fate is lost because he was clever, or maybe it's lost because we've never wanted to look straight at what it says about us. Either way, the lesson is the same. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives with perfect manners, does its chores without complaint, and learns your face before you learn its name.